That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Call Jane, the directorial debut of what?
Nothing. Directorial.
Sometimes words come out of my mouth funny. Directed by Phyllis Nagy, who is, of course, the Oscar-nominated scribe for Carol, directed by Todd Haynes back in 2015. This premiered at the 2022 Sundance Film Festival. Shortly afterward, it will play in competition at the 2022 Berlin International Film Festival. And as of this recording, it is without distribution, but stars the one, the only, the amazing Sigourney Weaver.
The basic story is there's a collective of women called the Janes. And so it's in the late 60s when abortion is not legal, and they are assisting women in having abortions.
In Chicago.
And Sigourney Weaver's character is sort of the one organizing all of it. But the story focuses more on Elizabeth Banks. She is a upper middle class housewife who is married to an attorney, a very conservative, straight-laced attorney. We're introduced to them because she is pregnant, or when she is pregnant, and she's told by the doctor that she's suffering from cardiomyopathy due to the pregnancy, and she has a 50-50 chance of dying as a result of seeing this baby to term. So her doctor says, you might want to try to terminate this pregnancy. It won't be easy because it's not legal. You have to have a really good reason. So you have to appeal to the medical board. And there's a super cringy, frustrating scene where she does go to the medical board, and it's all these men smoking cigarettes in this room telling her nope, it's not right. We don't believe in it. As long as the baby is alive, we don't care. Literally. So she, her lawyer, that's who that guy was, right? Who's the guy who tells her to pretend she wants to commit suicide?
Her doctor.
Oh, that's right. After the appeal goes nowhere, her doctor says, well, if you can get 2 psychiatrists to say you're suicidal, they'll let you terminate the pregnancy. That doesn't work. One of the ladies at the psychiatry office tells her to throw herself down a flight of stairs. Then one of the psychiatrists gives her a number to a back alley abortionist. She does go visit that place, but is freaked out by it. And then in a moment of despair, she sees a flyer that says pregnant, anxious, call Jane. She calls the number, they set up a meeting, she goes, and for $600 they will perform the abortion. She gets it done, everything's fine. When Sigourney Weaver calls her up and is like, hey girl, I need your help, convinces her to help her, and that ropes Elizabeth Banks into being very involved in this cohort of people. And we see her become very invested in helping other women to the point where she decides she wants to learn how to do abortions or perform abortions.
The procedure.
And the way she's able to do that is the doctor who's doing it, who they refer to as a capitalist pig, he's kind of asking for her assistance because his bedside manner is terrible. And Elizabeth Banks is able to assist with that. She finds out through research she's doing on her own that this doctor is not a licensed medical physician or a medical doctor. So there's something in my eye. So she follows him home one day and strong arms him. She says, unless you want me to tell Segovia that you're not a real doctor, you're going to show me how to perform abortions. So he does. And she gets really good at it. But the jig is up when one day she comes home and there's a police car in the driveway. And I think this is the best scene in the film. This police officer is sort of questioning her in front of her husband. Are you involved in this thing? And she's like, no. And the husband's defending her blindly. And as the audience, we're like, oh no. But then he goes, well, it's too bad you're not involved. Because if you were, I could really use your help. Because he has a loved one who needs an abortion. So she goes, okay, it's $600. And that's when the husband finds out. So when the husband finds out, he's like, okay, you're done. So Elizabeth stops doing it. But then Sigourney convinces her, we need you. So she commits to teaching all of the women. And this is all based on like a real group of women.
Yes.
She teaches all the women how to perform abortions. And then we find out that this collection of women helped about 12,000 women successfully terminate their pregnancies until they were raided. But the raid also coincides with Roe versus Wade. So then the final scene of the film is Sigourney sort of telling everyone, like, you know, what we accomplished was amazing, but it's time to move on because we're no longer needed. The end.
Yeah, there you go.
I thought this was a good movie.
It is good. It is a little paint by numbers. It's almost like a family-friendly abortion film. But not to say there aren't scenes that are very frustrating and anxiety-ridden and upsetting, but also at the same time it is clearly trying to not, I think, scare people away from receiving its message. I think it's important to note that both Banks and Weaver, playing Joy and Virginia respectively, are kind of a amalgamation of women in the collective.
Well, you're going to talk about, you actually watched a documentary about this group of women, so you can talk about how it differs from the movie.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, so at the same film festival, there's a super recuperation of this kind of, you know, I think what's kind of a history that's gone to the wayside of these women, the Jane Collective, called the Janes. And I think that it really would behoove one to watch that documentary plus this film, because it really gets into the operation and the origins of the Janes. I think there are a lot of things that, just by default, because this call Jane is 2 hours, I think they really tried to smooth over, sometimes to its detriment. Like this raid, but hearing the voices of these women that are still alive, you can piece together how the script came together from Haley Shore and Roshan Sethi. And they make a brave attempt to cover a lot of ground, but you end up with a film that really is about, shown through the prism of one woman's kind of character arc, with juxtaposed with the group. And the group, besides Sigourney, you really don't get a lot of characterization.
So I think the film was over 2 hours, and it clipped along very nicely.
Yes.
But I think it's because the subject matter is so compelling and just so frustrating. So I think I was very invested in wanting to see these people be successful in their endeavors. So it works on that level. It does feel like a TV movie, not in the production value, but just in the way that it seems like it's trying to have a very broad audience.
I think the structure,
and not ruffle too many feathers. But what's interesting is, so, this idea of like Jane, like there isn't a person named Jane. Jane represents all of these women. So I kind of wish the film would have focused on the collective as a whole. Like, I didn't need Elizabeth Banks per se. I think I would have preferred to see like the struggle. Because the other thing, oh gosh, like a lot of my notes are about just how frustrating it is to see the obstacles so many of these women historically have had to go through to have control over their reproductive rights and their bodies. So I really wanted to see more of that struggle, because I can imagine, like, if a younger person watched this film and they didn't understand that the rights that many people who can have children now have didn't exist back then, this film really wouldn't, it doesn't make it crystal clear how difficult it was. Well, it kind of actually makes it seem like, it's just this specific hospital and this specific lady. We do get a lot of time spent on the collective receiving messages from women who need help. But I think, I don't know, I really wanted to get into the weeds with like the more gritty bits. Not that I need it to be like Macy Gray and For Colored Girls, because that was also very hard to watch. But
I like that that's your reference, because there's so much like more
I know
like grotesque abortion scenes, like in 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, and Happening, which won Venice this past year and is also playing at this film festival, which has a very graphic abortion scene. I'm
not asking for that. I think I wanted to see the struggle and the frustration with these women looking for help, and we really don't get that. In fact, the one woman who we see get an abortion is like this young girl who's kind of stupid because she's having an affair with her boss, so she comes to get an abortion twice, or gets an abortion on 2 separate occasions, which I found interesting, because a plot point for one of the only black character,
Wunmi Mosaku playing Gwen.
she's really advocating for like, you know, because we're charging $600 in 1968, right? Really only like rich white ladies can afford it. So all these black women who need help and women of other, you know, people of color cannot afford. So she's really advocating for that. So I thought it was interesting that we don't really spend any time with anyone except this like young, pretty white girl. Again, I think it feels like a deliberate choice. Like we're trying to make it palatable to get this message across, and it is effective. I was very emotional watching the film.
Yeah.
I do think some of the dialogue is, you know.
Again, I think it's more with peripheral characters, and I think getting into, I think Elizabeth Banks, who I think is quite fine as the lead. I really did like her performance, but I think when we're having to deal with her life outside of the collective, sans that John Magaro scene as the undercover detective, which is a really good scene. But everything with Chris Messina as her husband and her daughter, Charlotte, played by Grace Edwards, and her neighbor, Lana, played by Kate Mara, all of that felt a little bit rote, and I really didn't care as much about it, except for I really liked the vibrancy of these women and this activism. And, you know, I think Sigourney Weaver is perfectly cast as this kind of Gloria Steinem type feminist who's very no-nonsense, very unfussy, gets things done.
Although her hair in this movie is a problem because it's too nice.
Sure, but she looks good.
She does look good, but I feel like a woman like her would not care about her hair.
Sure.
So I did find her hair situation distracting.
I'll take that note and accept it.
I hated Elizabeth Banks' daughter. I have a note that says, too bad she can't terminate that girl.
Oh my God.
Because, first of all, this girl's supposed to be 15. And when I tell you she sounds and looks like a 29-year-old cocktail waitress from Reno, it was just distracting to me.
I thought that they cast this particular person in this role because she had that kind of awkward sensibility as a teenager. Like, she moved like somebody that's not comfortable in her body yet, is what I thought.
Well, that's accurate, I guess.
And so also of note that this man that's the doctor is the reason that who's not a doctor, played by Cory Michael Smith, Dr. Dean. He's the reason that they're charging the $600 because these women think that it has to be a physician to do it. And I think there are some powerful moments where Joy, Elizabeth Banks, comes to realize like, well, if he can do it, I can do it.
That's a really good point that I didn't think about, but I feel like the logistics of if you're committing a crime like this. If that doctor had been an actual licensed physician, he's committing a crime. So if you're committing a crime, it doesn't matter who's doing it. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it was just too smooth. Like, oh well, I'm going to do abortions now.
But you know, watching the Janes, I feel like that kind of is how it happened. Like,
no, I understand that that's how it happened. I just don't know that in reality, I'm sure the decision that these women made to perform these procedures on other women was a very tough one because they're doing it out of care and concern and wanting to help, but they're also assuming a lot of risk.
Yes.
So I think that would be a very difficult decision for someone to make. And in this film, she's just like, oh, I'm actually really good at this. And then we never hear her, like, there's no understanding of like needing to, like, obviously this is a procedure that needs to be handled by a medical professional because there are outlying issues that, you know, it's not just learning how to scrape a fetus out of it, you know, from a cervix and then give a shot to stop the bleeding. There are a lot of things that could go wrong. So, you know, maybe I'm asking for like a procedural and maybe something that's a little more like true to how it was. This just feels kind of like fluffy.
It does, but it's trying to walk a fine line between being true to the sentiment of what is going on and also, you know, trying to be something that's not just speaking to the choir, and that is a hard line to walk. And also, you know, we're in a really weird regressive time where it's like this is set in the past, but this could also be the future.
Also, so Elizabeth Banks' husband is, you know, this conservative lawyer who seems to have a very precise idea of what a housewife should be and what his wife needs to be. Like, he complains about her not having a hot or...
He's tired of frozen meatloaf.
Yeah, like he wants dinner prepared when he gets home. He doesn't want to come home and his wife's not even there. So that's a plot point. And then, what's her character's name?
Who?
Elizabeth Banks.
Joy
is gone a lot because she's investing a lot of time in the Janes. And and her excuse throughout the entire film is, I'm taking art lessons. I thought that was silly. Because her husband's an attorney.
Sure, but it's also in painting by numbers in the way that it's like men are so oblivious, but they are.
Then and then I didn't understand, like, he has a slight dalliance with the neighbor who's friends with Elizabeth Banks.
A widow, yeah.
I didn't understand the purpose of that. I feel like that could have been thrown away to spend more time on these women.
I agree, and then even though Kate Mara, who was previously in Tadpole with Sigourney Weaver, and her sister, of course, starred in Carol.
I don't know that lady, but I thought she looked nice. I liked her little hairdo, yeah.
Okay.
And she's wearing like little button-up blouses tucked into her jeans.
She likes to drink outside and smoke on the porch.
Yeah, I liked her little character. I just think she was unnecessary.
I think she was unnecessary, but I liked the introductions of the women watching Green Acres and Diary of a Mad Housewife being like they were trying to paint a picture of the period in that way. I also kind of like the opening where Elizabeth Banks, you see her first with that tightly hewn honey blonde hairdo as she's walking down the stairs and sees that demonstration outside, which kind of sets out, and as she's kind of doing things secretively around the city, she reminded me of style like a Hitchcock heroine of the era. And I forgot what I was going to say.
I also feel like, because I don't think we needed we didn't need to focus so much on her character, which is my biggest complaint. But then the fact that we did, it's interesting that we don't really see her character reconcile the fact that she's married to this conservative man who didn't even, like, your wife may die as a result of birthing your child, and you're more concerned about the child. And then she has an abortion, but she tells her husband she had a miscarriage. And then it's like, the way it's shot, it's like the next day he's like expecting her to just be like normal. And I just think, like, clearly her character is not that type of lady. Like, no. It's like she has a mind and she's gonna do what's right. So I wish we would have seen her reconcile the fact that, like, she's with this man.
But he comes around and
does he?
Yeah, Sigourney's monologue at the end, she talks about how this man helped them with their legal
But we don't see that. We see him being, like,
we difficult. Don't see that. But again, I think the screenplay's trying to do a little bit too much and, like, pack it all in there where we maybe don't need all that. Because at the time, it ends in 1973 after Roe versus Wade is passed. And it's like we needed a little bit of an extra act to understand, because I think just the raid itself from the documentary would have made a very interesting intense scene, and how the homicide division reacted to these women, and the trial, and this lawyer, that kept putting things off because they knew Roe versus Wade was happening in the eves, and because, of course, as soon as that happened, all the charges were dropped, because otherwise these women were facing like 110 years in prison that were caught. There's just so many interesting, fascinating things. So it's always curious to see what is focused on or not. And but really, like, I was unaware of this collective altogether, because, like a lot of women in history, there's just trenchant, significant erasure. But also, it didn't come as a surprise that this existed, and there are probably a lot of other groups and pieces of history that we haven't pieced together, or that many of us are ignorant of, but it just didn't come as a shock to me that this was happening, because it had to.
Man, and then watching this, it just feels like, we are reverting with women's health, reproductive rights, civil rights. I think, like, I don't want to get into a rant, maybe in the podcast, I don't know. I just think, like, for all of y'all married to these men who don't support, like, this shit is only going to get worse.
Yeah.
And that's all I'll say. I did like this movie. I would recommend it. It's fun seeing Sigourney Weaver.
So there are a few really good scenes, I think, where Elizabeth Banks undergoes the procedure, I think, was a really good scene. When she holds out her hands and says she's scared. I think that, and there's a very tight focus on her face. That's a really good scene. The John Magaro detective scene, and also Sigourney Weaver doing a striptease.
Oh, yes. So Sigourney Weaver, like, seduces the abortion doctor, because the black lady is, like I mentioned, accusing her of, like, not trying to help black women more. And of course, Sigourney's character is like, how can you think that I don't care? It's just I'm doing the best I can. So cut to her seducing the abortionist with the idea that, like, how can she get him to either lower the price, and he is attracted to her because he says he digs older women. And the doctor's interesting because he's I couldn't tell if I thought he was very good looking or
scary,
which is I kind of like that combination actually. But she sort of like makes a deal with him with this little striptease, and the deal they make is that if she can get him 10 abortions a week at full price, he'll give her 2 free. And then her thought was, I'll give those 2 free to black women. I thought that was a very good scene.
Yeah, that was very good. And I'm glad. I don't think it gets into the weeds enough, as you said, with kind of the intersectionality and kind of how black women, of course, have always fallen to the wayside. But I'm happy that it attempted to address it. Could it have been stronger in a lot of ways? Yes, but there's a poignancy and an empathy here, and I feel like I always tear up in movies when I see kindness. So when Sigourney sits her down, and because they have a thing where the women who get an abortion, they go get spaghetti afterwards, where the Janes are set up to get their blood sugar up, and just the care taken to say,
it's emotional.
The hormones are going to be all over the place in your body after this abortion, and that's okay, and it's okay to feel bad, and it's very meaningful to see this. I think. Will it be preaching to the choir? I don't know. Oh, and I think it's interesting to know. I think this was coming together back in 2019. This project, it was going to star Elizabeth Moss and Susan Sarandon with the director
Elizabeth Moss
from *Handmaid's Tale* and *The Invisible Man*, which you like so much.
Yes.
Among many other things, and the director of *Coda* was attached. So I find it interesting how this project itself has kind of gone over a kind of a transfiguration. But I've seen it twice now, because every time I see a Sigourney Weaver movie, I kind of have to. I was a little bit starstruck, so I miss out on things. But yeah,
we need to wrap it up. Do you have anything else? I don't want you to feel like I shortchanged you.
Of course not. No, I would give this film 3.5 out of 5.
I would give it 3 out of 5. It's good, which means I think it's good, and I would recommend it.
Okay.
Anything else?
No.
Bye.
Bye.